Hello there, this is the third video associated with the step adding associations in the Joomla tutorial series developing an MVC component. And in this particular video we're going to be looking at the front-end aspects, hreflang and the language switcher URLs and the changes to the custom router. Now if you put Google hreflang into Google, you find this page here, and this talks about the reason why it's a good thing to include these hreflang parameters in your HTML so that search engines like Google can find equivalents in other languages and display more appropriate search results to users. So it's worthwhile reading about that. And Joomla gives us a lot of stuff out of the box in terms of support regarding hreflang. And the other thing that we're going to be looking at in this video is the associations that are set up between the URLs in the language switcher, which enables a user to go from something in one language to its equivalent in another. Okay, so at the outset, what I want to do is set search engine friendly URLs to off. I will save that. And I want to go and delete our router.php file. So this is in the live directory, as it were. So we're not going to have a router.php file, really to show what comes with Joomla out of the box, as it were. So what we've got in terms of associations, well, not a lot for our Hello World records. I've associated a couple of them. I've associated see you later in English with hasta luego in Spanish, and I've set some associations in the categories as well, which we'll come to in a little moment. But I've also put together a number of associations associated with menu items. So you may remember we created a form for the front end, which enabled a user on the front end to create a Hello World record. And there's equivalents of that in the three languages that I'm focusing on here, French, Spanish, and English. So we've got Nueva Entrada in Spanish, which is linked to Nouvelle Salutation in French, and New Message in English. So if we look at our new message, click on that, we find the form there. And then if we look at our equivalent in Spanish, you can see it kind of down the bottom. I'll just put that up. You can see it over the left hand side there. And if we click on that, it will take us to our Spanish equivalent, and similarly our French equivalent. And then if I put our tools on and we look in our head here, here's our hreflang parameters going to the various different item IDs, going to the various different menu items. So we've got 830 is French, 831 is English, 832 is Spanish. So if we go to our menu items here and we look at 830 is Nouvelle Salutation, 831 is New Message, 832 is Nueva Entrada. So Joomla is setting up those hreflang parameters and setting up this language switcher based on what we have defined in terms of associations or menu items. And we'll take another example. We've set up hola in Spanish and we've associated that with hello world and bonjour, and this is in our menu items. Not Hello World records, it's just in our menu items. So let's close that. And we'll go to bonjour. And again, if we switch then to Spanish, we get hola. And to English is hello world. And if we take a look of the item ID is 690 there. Go to Spanish, it's 691, and in French, oh sorry, it's French is 691, Spanish is 692. And here they are here, 690, 691, and 692 for the hola, bonjour, and hello world menu items. Those are menu items, remember. Okay, so the first thing to note is that with no hello world associations, the language switcher URLs are based on associating menu items. Okay, so let's look at building in some hello world associations. And we have in our code here, front end, we have this helpers file. And when Joomla wants to kind of set up an association or define those URLs in the language switcher and the hreflang tags in the head, then it will come along to us and it will look for this kind of class and this method, and it will ask us what is the association with this particular record, and it will pass in an ID and a view, and the view will be either hello world or category, and for that ID it will expect something back. And really the traditional thing, or the standard thing to pass back, is the associated record. So if we were asked, for example, for hello world view with record ID 126, we would pass back 123 because that is what is associated. So let's set some of these up. So what I want to do is change the hello world record hello world, and I'm going to associate it with, I'm not going to use hola, I'm going to use buenos dias. And in French, I'm just going to put bonjour again. And save and close that. Now we'll go back to bonjour. And we'll just click on bonjour again. Okay. So now when we click on the English one, we get hello world. If we click on the Spanish one, we get buenos dias. So whereas before we went to hola, because that was how the menu items were associated together, now we're actually going to buenos dias, because that is how the hello world records are associated together. And obviously what is happening here is that the hello world records are taking precedence over any associations with the menu items. So Joomla is first coming to us to check associations, and if it doesn't find any, then it goes to the menu items associations. However, if we take a look back at the French one here, and we look at the item ID here, 691, and if we go to our menu items and we go to 691, we see that's for bonjour. So we have clicked on the bonjour menu item to get the bonjour hello world record displayed. Then if we go to the equivalent of English, what we find is that the item ID is still 691. And if we go to Spanish, again, the item ID is still 691. So whereas before we were using menu items to provide the association, here we're just using Hello World records. So Joomla doesn't know where else to put it because it hasn't got a different menu item to put it on. So it just puts it on the same one, which is 691. Well, does that cause any problems? Well, it can do, in fact, because certain things are associated with menu items. For example, I've switched on the search button here, the search module, but what I've done is that I've assigned it to all of the menus, but not to the English one. Then what happens is whenever I go from French here, bonjour, we've got the search button here, and I click on the English one, it's still there. And that's really a problem because normally when you're going on English menu items, you don't have that search button. So there are certain things we'd want to show on the French side of things, modules, for example, which we don't want to show on the English side. But if we go through this mechanism of switching, if we don't do anything about this, then we see them on the wrong language. So the second thing to note is that the Hello World records and category associations as well will override the menu items, but they do give the wrong item ID. So let's rename Hello World router back again. So I've got a copy of it here. And I'm just going to put it back to router.php. And I'm going to go to the French home page. I'm going to go to bonjour. Here's our search box. I'm going to go to bonjour. And then I'm going to go to its equivalent, which is Hello World record. And we've fixed the problem. So now you see that the item ID is 690. And how we fixed it is in our pre-process code here on the tutorial step page. So the pre-process method gets called for every time that you kind of build a URL using jroot _ method. So we fix up the item ID in this pre-process method, and that method gets called for URLs being built with jroot. Our build method doesn't always get called, it just really gets called for if we've got SEF set here, which we don't. Build method doesn't get called, but our pre-process call method does get called. So this is really where we are fixing up the item ID. So what we're doing is down here, we're really checking, is the item ID of the target URL the same as the one we're on? And if it's different, then we realize, well, we must be doing something like a language switcher link or an hreflang link. So what we do is down here, we try to find associated menu item with the correct language. So we first of all look to see, is there a com menu? Is there a menu which is associated? And whenever you call get associations, each of the core components in Joomla calls it in different ways. So if you're ever unsure about how to call it, the best thing is to look in the little administrator components, and here we are, menus, helpers, HTML, and you'll see a file there where it outputs the HTML on the equivalent view to our Hello Worlds view. So if we go back into, this is our Hello Worlds view where it's outputting all the Hello Worlds record. This is the equivalent for menus where it's outputting them all in the associations, and it gets those associations in that little helper file, and that's here. And there'll be a method of actually getting the associations. It's actually done in this menus helper file, so you have to go to another one there. It's in here. It's calling get associations. So if you copy that, that's what you really need for your own purposes. If you're like here wanting to call something like get associations for the menus. So anyway, what we're doing is we're finding, is there an association between the menu items, and if so, use that. If there's not, then just use the home page. So let's go back to our example here. Hello World. We're looking for equivalents here. We're on 690. Let's go to French one, sorry. Here we are on the French one. We've clicked on Bonjour, so we've got to the Bonjour and Hello World record, and we're on 691. This is the menu items, and we see that Bonjour 691 is related in that there's the Hello World and the Hola one there. So if we look at our Spanish one, item ID equals 692. I'll go and see what that is. And 692 is our Hola. Because what we've done is we've gone to our menu item, we've just clicked on 691 and find the equivalent, which is Hola, which will be 692. And then the equivalent to that also will be our English one, which will be Hello World, which will be this 691. So if we go and click on the English one, it's gone to 690. And if we then decide, well, let's take another example. We'll go to mensajes. We go to Spanish. Mensajes. So here we have our messages in Spanish. And if we look at the item ID, it's 703. We go to our French one, Salutation, and we find 823. And if we just look to see what those were, 703 mensajes, 823 Salutation. And then we click on the English one, and we get to 159. So we're still getting the messages here, but if we look at the menu items, our 159 is the English home page, so it's not messages. So whereas we had the Spanish and the French ones associated together, salutation and mensajes, we didn't have the messages associated there. So whenever we went through our code trying to find a menu item which was associated, we didn't find one there, so we just used the home page for that language. And that's why it's actually built it on top of the English home page, you can see in there. If we look at our categories messages is associated with salutation and mensajes. So whenever Joomla has tried to build up the associations for something like messages here, it's come to Hello World. Hello World has said, well, there's a French association which is salutation, and there's a Spanish association which is mensajes. It's then come into our preprocessor. Our preprocessor has tried to find the right languages for those, and it's found that for when we're on this messages menu item, there isn't one for Spanish or French, but when we're on mensajes 703, there is one for French. So when we click on salutation or when we click on mensajes, we have got the equivalents through our menu items here and here, but there's no equivalent menu item for our English one. So in terms of code, it's fallen down here and it's just using the home page. At least we know that that is going to give the right language. So we've fixed up the item ID in the pre-process method. And what we do in this example, we've tried to find the associated menu item if we're on a certain menu item. And if we don't find that, we've just used the home page. Okay, let's switch on SEF now. And we'll save that. And let's go to French. And we'll go to bonjour. And we'll just go by here. Bonjour. Now, let me go. Let me change something back here. Sorry, I think I've got the wrong router here. Let me try that again. This is what I want. If you have a look up here, you see salutation 110 bonjour. Now when we look at our Spanish one. We get mensaje 120, buenos dias. So if we look at our Hello World records, remember that bonjour as a Hello World record is associated with buenos dias. The kind of like the menu item that we're on is mensaje or salutation. Those were the ones that we incorporated for the Ajax stuff. That's these ones here. And I've linked together salutation with mensaje so that whenever we go through this code, we find those two associated. Now let's go and click on the English one. Okay, so the English one, we haven't linked this message here, haven't associated that. So it hasn't been able to find an associated menu item there, and it's dropped down to here and it's built it on top of the home page. So what we find here is that we get the Hello World message. However, if we look at the format of the URL here, we've got /component/hello world plus the details and item ID equals 159. So what we're doing here is we are using the Hello World homepage, which is actually usually used for content to display featured articles, and we're overriding the option or the component which is associated with the front page, and we're overriding it with Hello World. And whenever we do that, whenever we get a page which is associated with a certain menu item and we override the component, then we get some sort of a URL structure like that. So overriding the component on a menu item gives you this with item ID equals such and such a thing for the menu item. And we can't really get rid of this item ID because that's the thing that tells Joomla which menu item we're currently on. So we could, for example, have built it on top of some other Hello World page. So for example, we've got, this is our menu items. We've got, for example, new message, which is 831. Could have just built it on top of 831. And it would just look the same. So this is telling Joomla what item ID, what menu item we're building this on top of. So that's why there's an item ID there. Again, why is that important? Well, if we go back to our modules, let me close that. What we're going to do is publish the main menu. And I'm going to set up that main menu to be available only on the English homepage. So nowhere else is it available. So if we refresh this, there's no main menu. But if we go back to the home page and if we go back to mensaje, we should be able to find our way to it. Go back to our home page, and here's our main menu because this is built on top of the home page. So this item ID really tells Joomla which is the page that we're building this on top of, so it can actually incorporate things that are appropriate to that page. We can actually just go and delete it, obviously, from our URL bar, and click on it, and it doesn't appear. And in this case, really, Joomla has there's nothing to tell Joomla which menu item this is built on, so it's really just going to take defaults. It doesn't have a clue which menu item it should be using for things like the modules or anything, so it just really takes defaults. So for example, this is only on the pages selected, so it hasn't been on one of those pages, so it just leaves it off. If we change it to be on all pages except those selected, and save that, and refresh, it's going to appear. So that's the special case of whenever you don't have an item ID and Joomla has to find some way of actually outputting a page from basically the default stuff associated with things. Okay, the next thing to notice is that when you're on this type of URL, where you've got this component sort of format, you're going to find, and if you put some code, you can actually find it yourself, you're going to find that the active menu item is null. So even though you're kind of associating it with an item ID there, and that has a real page, whenever you go into your code and find active item ID, you're going to find that that is null. So because of that, we have to actually put some code in place to handle that, because when we come through here into our pre-process, we're going to find that query of item ID is not set if we're starting from a position like this. And if we want to then set up the equivalence here, then we're going to have to handle that. And what we do is, well, we're just going to use the home page for that URL. So if we look at here, we've got component, and if we click on the Spanish one, we get component as well. So once you're on something like this, it's kind of hard to get off it. You have to click on one of these menu items to get back to normality, as it were. And really, probably it's best avoided. If you see something like this, it probably means that there's some sort of a menu item which isn't set up properly. And if you set it up properly with associations, then you can avoid this situation with this component here. Okay, so the final thing is, if we look at this, here we've got bonjour, and we've got quite a mouthful in terms of the URL here. So one of the things you might like to try and do is, because we've got a bonjour menu item here, well, if we get some case like this, can we not just put the bonjour menu item out? So what you can try to do, and you'll be back into your pre-process code here, is if you find in your pre-process code that the parameters that you find within the query actually match one of the items in the menu, then what you can return in terms of a menu item, setting up your menu query item ID, you can just return the item ID of that particular menu item. And I've got this example here. If we just delete that and we rename this one, this will be the right one. And we'll try doing this again. And we'll go to the English. And here we've got back to Hello World. So let me just do that again. Here we're on French, this component. And when we create the URLs for these, we find that English has got already a menu item which is associated with Hello World, so we can just use it. So I'll give another example. If we search down here and we get the URLs for Goodbye World and Hello World, you see the difference there. Goodbye World has got this form of URL on the message, and if we go to Hello World and hover over it, it's got that. So what you're doing is whenever you come in here and you've got your parameters, what you can do is compare what you've got against the menu items. And if you're looking at menus and look at, for example, Hello World, Hello World here, this is the sort of thing that you need to look at. Hello World link has got com Hello World view equals Hello World ID equals 43, and if you take your code and compare what you get in query in terms of view and ID, and you form the link and compare that with the link here, you should be able to find a menu item which has that exact link, and then you can actually output that as the item ID and get Joomla to go to that rather than one of these ones here. So that's about it. I'm afraid that just custom router is complicated, and probably what's best to do is just to try out a few things, set up various associations on the menu items, on your Hello World records, on your categories, and just try a few things out and just check for yourself that you understand what's going on behind the scenes. Anyway, hopefully that's been useful, and thanks very much for listening. Bye.